Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to topic 13. In this topic, we're actually going to be seeing the different light render settings and understanding them. So once I'm done with this setup, guys, the first thing I'm going to do is before doing anything, I'm going to click on render interactive so you guys can start seeing the new render what we are trying to create. And you can see how the lighting is actually working over here. It's actually kind of bringing out a lot of the light. You can even see the surrounding has got the sky. Alright, so over here, once this render has started to take place, we'll open up our light settings, which is this one over here, and we're actually going to now understand each of the different lights. So first I'm going to go to the targeted light over here, which is basically that light which is happening over here. You guys can see that. Here you guys will notice if I go ahead and I change the color, we can actually bring out a different color in this whole spectrum. I can actually, reduce this to 0 angle, so the angle becomes completely 0, and I can even reduce the penumbra angle to 0. Now let's say I increase this angle, you can actually see how it's actually looking like a nice spot, like a more defined circle rather than a little bit diffused, and you can see how that diffuse basically works. When I increase this, you can actually see the diffuse starting to take place, and that's basically what the penumbra angle basically does. Okay, so now I'm going to disable this light so we can talk about the rest of the lights. Now before I even start with any of the lights, what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable all of them, and that's basically because I want you guys to see this box without any of the lights altogether. Alright, so you guys can actually see how this whole thing is looking, and you guys will notice that there is a shadow coming in this entire thing, right? You can actually see a shadow over here. I can control that shadow by simply making changes in SketchUp. So in SketchUp, if you guys know that there is something called the shadows, you can actually go ahead and change this shadow settings from here to actually get the shadow which you want. And you guys can see that we can completely set the shadow in the angle that we want, and also the sun brightness. Because global illumination is active over here, you're able to actually see in real time how the sun is affecting this opening. Now when we come into the lights, guys, you can see the dome light. At the moment you can see that the background is not really showing us anything, like it is completely just blue and blurry. The minute I enable the dome light, you'll actually see the the sky come behind us, as well as we have this whole setup completely created. And when I increase the intensity, you can actually see the sky's intensity being intensified. So it's actually looking much more like a brighter day than when I increase this kind of intensity. So I can actually set it up a very dull day by reducing this, just having a little dark day over here. At the same time, we can set this up like that. Now I've got the texture resolution. If I increase the resolution, it will try to get better and better, but of course whatever the highest is, that's all that's going to actually work out. Over here you can see we have got a couple of more options. If I click on invisible, you can actually see that it becomes invisible completely. Apart from that, you can see we have got spherical, so it'll act like a sphere. That's why the whole thing below gets black. We've got locked dome light, now where you cannot really move the dome light because it's locked. And then you've got the caustic shadow. Let's say I increase this completely, you'll actually see the shadow which we have over here kind of being a little bit changed. It's not being that much affected, but that's basically about how the whole thing looks. Now you can see over here, when I switch off the shadows actually just go away. So we can actually adjust the whole shadow settings from this option as well. Now this is basically our dome light, so let me just disable that dome light. Next thing is the Omni light. So it's not enabled. Let me just quickly enable that light, and that's where the Omni light is basically placed. So if you guys can see, let me just go ahead and select, let's say, a red color. So we will need to actually see that red color showing up over here. Now just to make sure that that's the Omni light, you guys can see when I click on this light, it actually goes over here. And we can actually select intensity. I can't really increase it more than this, but what I can do is I can select the intensifier and increase it from here as much as I want. And also make sure that when you're doing all of this, you have the particular unit that you want, it should be selected the way you want it. But after all of this, you guys will notice when I'm on radiance is when I can actually see that particular thing, and radiant power actually gives it a look something like this. But when it's on scalar, we really cannot see any options, even lumens or even the luminescence. So remember that OmniLight functions with radiant power. You can see how it's actually, bringing out that whole color, and with radiance it's actually encompassed within its own zone. So if I actually select this and I increase its intensity even further, you can actually see it's increasing, but it's still in its own zone. So that's something very important to understand. But this is a very good way to have buildings from the exterior. When you're looking at it from the exterior, you can actually switch on a lot of areas lights with just this OmniLight. So we'll be getting into this later on. Now the next thing over here is rectangular light, which is over here. Let me just enable that, and you can see something showing up over here. Now if I increase the intensity, you can actually see it intensify like this, and it actually bringing out a certain amount of light in this room. So when I decrease this, you can actually see it getting really dull, and when I increase it, you can actually see that light really affecting this whole thing. We're actually going to be using this light for a lot of different reasons, but remember, the more the intensity, the more you'll be able to understand where exactly that light is. Here we can actually see the depth of the light being there, like a little bit being inside, but the more I increase this, it will start to look as if it completely covers this whole space because it's so much of light over here. So remember that, guys. Next is the shape. I can actually switch this to ellipse, and we can have a circular shape, something like that, or I can switch this back to rectangle. After this, we have got options. You can see no light over here. Let's say simple light portal, and you can see that it completely disappears from here. And if I say portal light, it's the same way over here. So remember, this has to be on no light, and if this is invisible, again we will not be able to see it. Double-sided means it's going to actually bring light out from either both sides, but you can only see it's active here because it's having a depth. Then next thing over here, guys, is the diffuse. You can see when I remove that, there's very little changes happening, but if I tell you where the change is happening, you'll actually get a better understanding. Have a look at this darkness portion, and when I actually add the diffuse, you'll actually see that become white. That's because the light is not being diffused. That's why there is no light coming here. The light is still only over here. So how much ever I increase this, you'll always see the light not diffusing, and the minute I add this, the diffuse will automatically come. This is how you can activate and stop the diffuse of the light. Then you've got the reflections. So do you want it to affect reflections? Well, if you want it to affect reflections, then keep it switched on, otherwise keep it switched off. So these are basically the various different options. Now of course all the options have meaning, but depending on how you want the entire light to look, you're going to have to completely work on it. Next thing over here, guys, is the spotlight. Now when I talk about the spotlight, you can see it's not enabled. Let me disable this. Let me enable the spotlights, and you can see how these spotlights are just four circles on top of each other. There's one very light one there, that's where the fourth one is. But how do we adjust these? Now over here you can see color. Definitely color would change this way, same as the targeted lighting. Here we've got luminance, power. These basically just change the whole look of how that thing needs to be, so you can set it according to what you want. You can see this really is good because it encompasses itself in its own area. So I'm just going to keep it on scalar. Next we have got the intensity, so I can increase that to show you how it gets more intense. Then we have got the cone angle, if you want to increase that a little bit, or definitely we have the penumbra angle, which you guys know increases the diffuse. And if I talk about the options, you can actually see affect diffuse. That means not affect diffuse, it completely just goes away, and that's basically about how it's going to look if you remove off the diffuse. Then you have got linear. You can change it to inverse, you can change it to inverse square, but of course linear is what this light is all about. Next you've got the shadows. Do you want the shadows being affected? So if you see shadows, this basically means, and options are basically for this particular light, okay? So here the shadows are not affecting it, that's why it's falling down like this. But the minute you click on shadows, it's actually going to give you a much better look, because there is a box over here, it cannot really fall like that inside. And you can see I can switch off the shadows, and then I can actually increase the shadow radius, over here to get it a little bit more affected. But you need to make sure that it looks realistic, so that's why we cannot have it like this, and we need to actually change this a little bit. Let's say something like this, and if I put up the colors, let's just say something towards the whiter color, something like that. And that's basically about how it should look, you know. So that's basically something what we're trying to, you know, create. And once you get the perfect light setting or the way it should look, you can test it out a couple of times, and then once you're happy with it, you can move ahead. But before I even take you guys to the next topic, I want you guys to see and understand one simple thing, that you can see the spotlights over here are not yet lit up, and that's because we haven't yet edited its material. So to edit its material, I'm simply going to select that particular color, which I think is dark orange, and that's correct, it's dark orange. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply click on generic and click on emissive, or I can even go into the large settings and add emissive by clicking over here. The minute I add emissive, you will see over here that this light automatically will start to change. Now let me just kind of increase this slightly. Let me just give a little move and bring it back over here. You guys will actually see how the emissive light is now looking. And if I click, and you can see it's black, but let me just click on double-sided, so it would even then start lighting. You need to move the screen a little bit so that you can actually start seeing it, you know, bringing light. Because again, let's say the material is giving light on the other side, you don't like that, so just switch on double side, it's the same thing. Alright, next you can change the color from here. Let me just set up a color which I think, you know, would be looking good. You can just move that a little bit, open up the buffer frame again. We've got the intensity, which I can increase, and you can actually see it looks really good to give it like a look something like this. And you can actually see this color is showcasing over here. Okay, next we have one more space where we can add this light. That's basically over here, and I'm going to actually add emissive to this as well, and I'm going to actually leave it the way it was, which is somewhat orangish. And I'm actually now going to increase the intensity. So guys, I want you to have a look at how the conceal lighting looks when we give it emissivity. It looks actually damn good, because I mean, that's too much of that's too much of intensity in that, but you guys will still get an understanding of how it's going to look. That's as great as it can be, and you can actually adjust all these settings to get the best you want. Now this render is of course a dull render, but you can understand how it's going to look, right? So this is something that I want you guys to try out with all the lights, and this is basically how you guys should understand light, by doing very basic tests with yourself and then kind of developing the mood that you're looking for in that particular room. So I hope you guys understood and liked this particular topic, because it's got all about light. So I hope you guys finish this off, and I'll see you guys in the next topic. Take care.